Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Shakespeare and Company. It's often said that Paris is kind of the crossroads of Europe, if not the world. And tonight, this is kind of an event which epitomizes that, because we're delighted to welcome one of our former employees, Terry Craven, who left Paris to go to Madrid to open his own bookstore, Desperate Literature, from where he decided to launch an international writing competition. And as a result, we have the winner of that competition and the runner-up and some of the shortlistees who've come from various different directions. I think the vast majority from the UK. So it sort of gives an example of how Paris is really that kind of crossroads. And we're delighted to welcome everyone tonight. I'm going to let Terry introduce the prize, talk a little bit about some of the stories and some of the winners. But before I do, or indeed in order to welcome Terry up to stage, please give Terry, Ed, Gordon, Jay, and Georgia a big hand.
I'm a lot shorter than him. Hello, everyone. Hi, as he stole most of my lines, actually. Yeah, I'm Terry, and hi. And it's really lovely to be here back at Shakespeare & Company. I'm the co-owner and co-manager of Desperate Literature in Madrid, and I used to work here for 6.5 years, so it's really wonderful. I also coordinated the Shakespeare & Company Literary Prize about 7 years ago, so it's really wonderful to be back here. The shortlist that we've put together in this lovely book, available tonight, here, there you go, is a really wonderful collection, eclectic, experimental short fiction. And we received over 450 entrants from all over the world, from 36 different countries. And we reduced it down, along with myself. There were 4 people who read to bring it down to 11 stories, the shortlist that you see here. Myself, Rob Greer over here, who was our former bookseller, and Emily. And these guys are going to introduce the readers tonight. And I'm just going to quickly talk, just thank a few people. So the 3 judges we had, Ewan Monaghan, Hestia Pepe, and Ellie Williams. They're editors of literary journals that are really very wonderful, Structo Magazine and 3am. They produce excellent experimental literature, and if you've not read their stuff, I encourage you to do so. Ellie Williams was kind enough to give us a really wonderful review on the back of the book. I won't read that out, it sounds a bit pretentious to do so, but you can read it yourselves. I'm just going to thank some of the sponsors who helped us out. The two really is the Civitallo Ranieri Foundation. They've stuck with us. They're a foundation that have a castle in Italy, and Ed's going to be going to stay there for a week and write there, and I'm very jealous, to be honest. And the other is the De Groot Foundation, and they're a Paris-based foundation. Really wonderful people who've supported us. I don't really need to say any more. I'm going to invite up, who's going to talk first, to introduce someone first. We're going to ask Emily to come up here. She's going to introduce the first reader, Jay. And thank you everyone for being here. It's a real honour to be at Shakespeare & Company again. Thank you, Shakespeare & Company, and thank you, Adam, for having us. Yeah, put your hands together for Emily. She's going to introduce.
J.G. Ying. J.G. Ying currently studies in Edinburgh. His prose poetry has previously appeared in the Adroit Journal, where he now works as a prose reader. He has previously lived in Hong Kong, the Netherlands, and the United States, and this is a story that appears on the shortlist.
Hello. I've just come from dashed off from Charles de Gaulle on a Ryanair flight, so I'm a bit disheveled, so you'll have to forgive me. The story is called Clio, and it's based off a story based off one of my inspirations, which is the late architect Zaha Hadid, written sort of very shortly after she died. Can you hear me at the back? A few months after I learned I was the favorite to win that year's Pritzker Prize, a man asked me during an interview why I only design libraries, put in a way so that behind the flatness of his question, I could sense the accusation that they were beneath his time. And I recall that as we both sat silent for a second in my firm's studio in Zurich, the cries of a child fading from the road outside, I could see through the white glass doors into a lounge of white space where that morning, my firm had just secured and finalized the deal to rebuild the recently destroyed Bibliotheca Alexandrina, so it seemed inevitable to me for the fate of that structure, of that time, to repeat itself. And I remember that as we nervously received the news, we were unsure as to how to move on next, shifting piles of paper around in circular waves, back and forth, to and fro, looped in a daze as we realized the numbness of that undertaking, of the anticipatory life of then, there, sedated, standing on history's right side for once, knowing that great work could be brought back from the dead. Yet in the time I waited for the interviewer to arrive, I felt imprecise and distant, as if I was struck on the other side of an unsketched river, remembering the sun coming through the office skylight in large slats which crackled on that old wood. Yet the more I lingered on that unrealized riverbank, how greater that old, slimy, seductive idea of a library becoming the last thing that I would rebuild on this earth would unroll and sliver itself into my mind. I would sometimes glance down at my freckled hand, which lay on that textured white card before me, clammy and swollen, as if it were not mine, but an archaeological stone netted from the seabed, hard and yellow and foam on the empty page, so that by lunchtime I had not yet managed to sketch one thing down with those lumpy fingers. Yet, was it with sincerity when I answered the man, "No one does this like I do," as I shrugged, as I gestured with my hands towards the card, as if it were filled with ideas only revealed to my side. And for the rest of the interview, I was distracted mostly by the image of the library in its antiquity, burning itself into my eye like a blind spot, where there, in my mind, in the corner, I had seen a vision of a sad swan stir on the white card, unafraid, its wings multiplying outwards at the very precise moment its body would take off from the blank water or blank page. But of course, I had visited the old library often when my family and I had lived in Cairo, almost a lifetime ago already. And I remember those moments when I would sneak away between classes and find myself there almost by accident by its entrance, and in awe I had seen its sundial calling down to me as an old tombstone, a lost friend, a found relative, its disk half submerged in the half-dusk, sublime, sacred, but sown already half done in the dirty dust. And as the first stones were being lowered into place almost 1 year later, when once more there, like a refrain, reincarnating, the idea of a mute swan reintroduced in my head, but not the memory from where it could have come from, I decided I had to visit Alexandria as soon as I could, finding myself drawn, as if I had been sleepwalking, towards the empty space where the bibliotheca should have stood, near where accounts of the original library would have stood, where my maktaba would soon stand, and knowing then, between those three spaces, like three paper sheets folded into one, I thought how, like three ghostly singing rods, they had caught me in the twisted and coiled presence of their absences, so that for the rest of my life I remembered that first day of work as if it were my last day of life. The deathly Nile Delta hustling in from the east, the ritualized bleating and saluting of those desperate hunchbacked cars on El Gaish roadblock towards the sun. And I saw in front of me there could have been the flinching statue of Ptolemy II standing guard, he who had survived multiple blasts of the bombing, but was later on the night of the attack pushed over so that his hollow and resigned face had split over the pits of the papyrus plants, his head smuggled away in jagged chunks to be sold like blocks of salt by the insurgents. And during those first few days in our rented Alexandria offices, often I would end up rifling through my old design books for inspiration, until I found the photocopies of my predecessors' original plans pressed within. And I would think how incalculable was the loss of that library to exist no more, as I pored over and through somebody else's dream no longer, for a second time erased, not realizing then that towards the end of the project I would forget with a shame exactly how many had died years ago that day in total. only able to see in a recurring dream resurfaced, flames flicking against the glass of my new roof like a tongue of a snake, a finger hurriedly tapping on the pane or on the wood, charred olive trees teeming with grenades instead of pips in the foreground. Of a haunting dream where the smoke curtains would not fall, of the tampered fans which would not work, of the glorious dead who died so that I could move from Zurich to Alexandria to replace the image of the swans in my head with the real swans fighting on the cloudy Nile, to use those who passed over to build back better, to pass over greater. And for a second too I thought all that which could be mine was here for me to take. But back at the beginning, as I sorely wished for the interview to end, worn out by those questions which I felt I had always been answering ever since I was a child, I realized I was unbearably and restlessly tired. My skin pruritic as if small creatures were coming to life underneath its surface, my right knee trembling, and on the white card there was a circle or print next to the white untouched chalk, of oil or sweat or of some other toxin shed from my skin which had rubbed off from where my palm pressed down too hard on the paper during the interview. The mark glistening in the sunlight coming from behind me like old fat, a sliver of my life gone. And I reasoned that from the seat that my interviewer would have been able to look a little behind me, across to the lake shore on the left side of the Zurich Sea, and could probably just about see the Strandbad Motinki, and when on a great morning, like that morning, I hoped there would be on the Lido a raft of children, like little snakes wriggling in the sun, and with couples stretched out on the strips of grass, like hot stones waiting to be turned over, where there used to be those totemic and bursting yellow umbrellas dotted out like stale sunflowers in the distance, which had the feeling of endlessness. When I, as a little girl, hid underneath their shade, afraid of being caught in the sun too long. And that morning, I remember as I instructed the interviewer to close the door behind him, the office silent once more, I turned in my chair to imagine those long-gone parasols bobbing and spinning on the water surface like a procession of loose petals, gesturing towards the sky, a warning from another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. That was amazing. Can we have a round of applause for Jay again, please? Woo! My name is Rob. I was one of the judges for the award, and it was a real pleasure to read all of the stories of the people that are here. They're all amazing. Jay's story, by the way, contains lots of drawings and maps, which, yeah, it really kind of adds to the story as well. But it was a really beautiful story, and thank you, Jay. Now on to our next reader, Georgia Hazelgrove. So Georgia, I'll just read your biography. Georgia is 21 and is studying a master's in creative and critical writing. She is a lover of European literature and is slowly learning French. She has been writing since she was 12. I personally really enjoyed Georgia's story because maybe when you read stories, you bring something of yourself into them. But what I kind of got from Georgia's story was this insularity of living in a city when you're a young person, and it can be kind of negative and positive at the same time, but you kind of grow to enjoy both things and they kind of mesh. But it was really wonderful, and I'm really glad that she's here to read it. And so can we have a round of applause for Georgia, please?
A little bit high. Thank you. Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. I'm so thrilled to be here, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I hope you enjoy my story. It's called What This Country Needs Is Another War. I don't know my own mind, or at least I never used to. After years of expectation as to what my beloved Paris would be like, of course I was a little jarred, and of course slightly disappointed upon my first visit. The crossings, the traffic, the markings on the pavement, the strangers, the intermittent graffiti, the sense of being small, was never part of my imaginings. I was unfair, but I didn't care. It is only when it is filtered through my memory that I can unconditionally appreciate the good looks of the place. In the now, we are anxious. We think we are being looked at. We become a walking hang-up. And how can we make a romance tale of that? We are the problem, and it grieves us. It is curious that starving in a garret is romantic. I know it is romantic. It conjures up navy and black and red, an atmosphere of ink and wine, of attractive thinness, of genius and love. Yet the romance has to be earned, of course. You must be long dead, and an acknowledged intellect. If someone is starving in a hovel nowadays, it gets on the news. Various examples of side-parted, grey-haired sincerity promise to help them. This is less romantic, to be sure, but it must be said that at least the plight is recognised, however inadequately. In more romantic times, the starving person would have been left to their own devices, because it was all their own fault anyway. Nevertheless, we sit back in our chairs, feel bored, and wish we were struggling artists who wear waistcoats and collarless shirts. Clothes are important, I find, in building a perspective. Those crinolines were so beautifully made, but it goes without saying that I prefer to not wear a corset and to be able to vote. Chances are, if I were around in the times of crinoline, I would not have been graced with the opportunity to adorn myself with this particular article of history. I don't, as far as I know, originate from moneyed ancestors. Most likely I would be wearing a black and white uniform made to render me unimpressive, consigned to the role of third housemaid on the left in a posthumous period drama adaptation of another's more impressive life. And still, I'll probably be wearing a corset underneath it all. Today I content myself with imitation. When I get bored with one thing, I wear something else. Clothes are quite cunning. We choose them, but they used to choose us. Even now I cannot trust them. I worry that they are planning their coup, and any day we will fall under their tyranny again. What this country needs is another war. Such is the insidious misery of tedium that you would rather be bombed, starved, and conscripted, than have nothing to do. Boredom is evolutionary, like the riddle. I have 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening. As a child, it is animalistic and to be fought against. As an adult, it is existential, to be written about, to be hated, but accepted. In old age, it is a right, and at its most raw. It makes you despise those who have not yet succumbed to it. Your boredom is by now so finely tuned that it makes you vicariously time travel. If only it were really the case that we are newborns in the morning, adults by the evening, and old people by the evening. Adults by the afternoon, and old people by the evening. It would leave no time for boredom. The riddle itself was part of a myth, told by a sphinx. I wonder if the sphinx ever grew bored, just sitting there, waiting for someone to come along so she could confuse them. The most exciting part of her day was eating the people who didn't guess correctly. It was Oedipus who solved the riddle. Oh my god. And we all know what happened to him, but he certainly wasn't bored. It's got a lovely wartime feel about it. This one confuses me just as much. I once saw an old photograph of a small girl standing by a blackboard. She was born during a war. She had been asked to draw her home. She had taken the piece of chalk and swirled it around. The scribbles grew larger until they covered every corner of the board. The result was like a dark brain. I saw another photograph of an even earlier time. It was of a soldier with bright white and blue eyes, shiningly empty. Even in the monochrome I could see his eyes were blue. He was smiling, but it was frightening. The 80s are, for me, at any rate, the height of ambivalence. I must rely on the recollections of others to form an opinion, but I don't know who to believe. One half talks about the mullet haircuts, the high-waisted blue jeans, the blockbusters about intrepid kids, and the synthesizer new romantic music. The other half talks about the Billy Elliot stuff. Miners' strikes, angry young men, poverty, no council homes left affordable, Thatcher. It is all too love-hate, too recent to really miss and too long ago to genuinely love. It is hard to believe that it followed such a golden era of jobs, houses, long hair, bright clothing and classic sitcoms, unless that time wasn't so golden after all, and it was inevitable that it became extinct. Who to believe? Do we need to believe anyone? Could they both be right? Sometimes I cannot tell the difference between something I know to be real and something I've dreamed. An instance of this is a mental picture of someone's head appearing from out of the bushes in a public park, with me screaming in genuine fright. If it did happen, it was at a time when I had no real need to form memories, being concerned only with immediate sensation. The image I have now of the head appearing is too indistinct to have really happened, but I cannot escape the feeling that I did see it, and that I am not wrong. Is this what very old age is like? Are dreams and memories part of the same escape exit? I cannot help but wonder what I will find myself doubting when I am old. Did I ever try contouring makeup? I'll ask myself. Or am I just remembering someone else's YouTube video? I remember those videos, they were great. Such a shame you can't get YouTube anymore. It's so much better than what we have nowadays. People used to put work into those videos, you know. Nowadays, no one has to put work into anything. What I remember lies at the bottom of my head, like an invisible nest. What I have forgotten might as well never have existed. It disappears from the universe. How terrifying. This is what happens when you cease to believe that the world can exist independently of your own mind. You eradicate your own history. I saw a charcoal drawing a few years ago of a fictional prison with many rooms and alcoves and staircases, but no doors. The fact that it was not a depiction of a real prison meant that it was awful to look at, and made it like a threat. It made me think of how claustrophobic it must be inside a skull. So dark, so subterranean, and so quiet. The turmoil is all unreal. Our minds may appear noisy, clattering all day long, clamouring like nuisance neighbours, but none of it truly exists. The insides of our heads are, in fact, the quietest places in the universe. Venus and Mars probably make more of a din. Inside your head there is no eating, no drinking, no speaking, no singing, nothing to see, nothing to miss or wish for. There is no one to share it with. It's another world in there, so quietly alive that its small space does not matter. It is scentless and the blackest black, rarely if ever disturbed. We are walking relics, and don't even know it. If you wait for a pearl of wisdom, you wait forever. It is upsetting to contemplate the idea that life remains unintelligent. We need a response, or an embrace. We think it must be the case that someone is better than us, and will care for the unenlightened. We have begun to doubt everyone, and it is sickening to realise that things outside of us are flawed. I couldn't read a clock until I was about 7, but I wore a little watch anyway, because I liked the way it looked. So I know the feeling well of pretending to know something, and it becoming clear upon further inspection that you are in the dark. People want to know who really knows. They are growing tired of people merely pretending to have the answer. We miss being told what to do, until we are told what to do, and the dreaminess of an eternal childhood vanishes. I wish I knew for certain why childhood is so enviable. I cannot form an opinion, because every memory is unclear, arranged into an overall impression, rather than as individual scenes from the cutting room floor. Perhaps this is why people miss it. It is vague enough to be cinematic. I imagine all memories are of a similar kind. Running around, laughing, sunny days, soft toys, easily pleased and easily annoyed. Probably the odd sandy beach or two. It might as well be an advert for a travel agent. Now is just as good, most of the time. I imagine in a few years I will be sentimental about where I am sitting now. I'll try to recreate it and become frustrated when I cannot. I will sink into the past as if it is hot water. I know what to expect. I can see neurosis on the horizon. Neurosis is an infinite thing, but I love it. It is an equalizer. It gives us humility. Weakness is underestimated. Imagine the world without it. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. Gordon Collins, our next reader, was one of our runners-up for the prize. Gordon Collins has been a market risk analyst, a maths lecturer, an English teacher in Japan, and a computer graphics researcher specializing in virtual humans. He has degrees in mathematics, as well as in MA in creative writing from the University of East Anglia. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, some of which are listed here, but you'll have to buy the book to find the rest of them. During the launch at Desperate Literature, Gordon's narrative created a lot of heated discussion between the judges, mostly due to his meticulous and intricate understanding of mushrooms. This story is sometimes unnerving, entirely fascinating, and an exploration log. So please welcome Gordon Collins, one of our runners-up, to the stage.
Thank you, Emily. That's great. Notes on Bainan's Vale. We have already found specimens of the unnamed cubensis with the blue-tinged caps, which are so valued by furniture makers. Also Elthwick blue spots, a kilo of turnum shells for the restaurants, and a broad disc of sunset flume for the potters. We picked various agarics, which could be sold in the markets as medicines, some spurious, such as the bicupt for virility and the plenny rod for diseases of the spleen, but others have been proved to contain anti-carcinogens. Our superiors at the Cebu Corporation encourage us to pick anything valuable in order to fund future expeditions. I discovered a Shimada sponge, which covered a rotten oak trunk as if a white jelly had been spread over it. I had been told that less than a teaspoon of this rare growth, added at the pulping stage of a paper manufacturer, will ensure unmatched consistency in the ream. We scraped it off and bagged it up, ready for our contacts in Manaus, who sell it for more than $40 a gram to the paperers. None of this was what we had came for. Michael, David, and I, Dr. Melanie Andrews, had been searching for a month for Bainan's Vale. Michael has put himself in charge of the navigation. David and I follow, checking our own maps. There has been so much misdirection that at times I've found myself thinking that our maps have been sabotaged. Most of the landmarks are fungi, though, and it is just as likely that these have receded, been overgrown, or picked, possibly even by ourselves. As we progress further from the camp, the specimens become more and more unusual. A drift of bubblegum blue caps fill a clearing. Grey blisters grow upside down from vines. There are so many unidentified species that we give up collecting them. The ones we do recognize grow more erratically, on the wrong trees, or spreading in lines rather than circles. All indications from the surrounding fungi show we are getting closer. We go further as deep into the forest as we dare, until today we find it. It's just as we had hoped, a large, complete ring of tall-stemmed fungi, with its distinctive sombrero cap almost oscillating on the faintest breeze, and inside this the veil. We know immediately. Without saying a word, we start digging. The specimen almost certainly contains Dr. Richard Bainan's body. The discovery of his eponymous veil will be the mycological event of the year. Of even greater importance for us, though, is Bainan's notebook, which catalogues the biology of hundreds of new specimens, as well as the veil itself. He had been our leader and our inspiration. He had discovered over 50 species and delineated 3 new classes. He had opened up studies in mycology which were unheard of 10 years ago, and which now form the scientific foundations of Cebu's pharmacological concerns. Before then, most of us had given up hope on Richard's dreams of a mysoculture that would provide us with new foods, medicine, and even computation. But his recent discoveries have made us believe again. We all knew his green notebook. He had taught us each from it, and we all carried a similar one. It would be buried, safe in its vinyl covering, deep within the veil, in the middle of the mound of fur, which formed a vague silhouette around his body, like a sleeping ghost. Bainan's veil takes about around a year to spread to such a large area, which is consistent with the time of Richard's disappearance. That is just the surface, though. The mycelium spread out for miles around, and we had already found them tangled in with the psilocybe, or blooming out in orange caps high above the mahogany tree. It is the canonical example of an ecosystem's controlling presence. Yes, I now believe such an outlandish theory. I have observed the veil's influence in every specimen we have encountered in this area. I have seen it activate sporing in chetinas as if it were sending smoke signals. I have seen how it lays out paths of dead saplings to create a river of nutrients. If a cordyceps can control an insect's brain, then why shouldn't a more advanced organism control a whole ecosystem? What do I mean by advanced? A highly symbiotic system, for if there was one thing we all agreed on, Bainen's veil cannot be one simple fungi, but a complex of fungi and an organizing principle. David is furthest in, ignoring the protocols and digging with a fervour that cannot be motivated by science or even profit alone. David, step back, I say to him, but he carries on digging out clods of earth filled with mycelium in the area where Bainen's hand might be. Michael points to David's ankle. The fool has left it exposed. I stare at the vein there and wonder if it is unusually green. A fur is appearing on his shoe and around the exposed area. David, come back, I say again. He turns. His face is pale and his head is lolling. He returns to his excavation. Michael and I step back. Leave him. We'll come back with a hazard unit, Michael says. He can't mean it. I try to think, but we must leave. David, come on, I say, but he won't come, and I can't go back in. David, we're going. We'll come back with help, I call to him. At the base, we wave to our colleagues in the main building and check ourselves into quarantine. I file the report on the intercom while Michael checks the medical supplies and food stores. The others say they will try to find David. I am becoming unbearably tired. I don't trust Michael. I cannot get over the way he left David. It was the right decision, but the way he did it, without a moment's regret, has shocked me. Michael appeared on the scene 2 years ago, having previously been in Tokyo. His background isn't in mycology, but in revenue conversion. He's thoroughly Seibu Corporation. They say he pushed Bainen to find the veil without the proper safety plan, and now he has to bring it in to save his job. That might just be a rumour. We eat together in silence, take a cocktail of antifungals, and soon we both fall asleep as the sickness takes hold of us. We dream together. It's hard to describe. David is there too, and Richard. We're in the veil together investigating. I know Michael dreams it too. We're all in it. Not talking, but growing closer and closer together, growing in the rainforest. I wake first, finding myself in his arms. I check in with the main building. They haven't been able to locate David. I must have slept for 24 hours. I stuff everything I need into a bag and set off without Michael. I find I know the way without the map. I walk without stopping. At the Vale, David is alive, but only inasmuch as he is a host to the mushroom. He sits on his haunches. Stipes grow from beneath him, and his head would not support itself if not for the growth all the way up his back and neck. He has excavated the notebook which lies on his lap. I retrieve it with care and sit a little way from him to read it. The vinyl covering is cracked and the tendrils of the mushroom has become entwined with the text, taking nourishment off the organic solvents in the ink. Words streak across the page and join with networks of other pages. Understanding it is an exercise in cryptomycology. Its meaning is dependent on the very mushroom it is describing. But it's not just the writing I struggle with. Richard's train of thought seems uncharacteristically convoluted. On one page it seems clear that he believes the veil to be hermaphroditic, and on another not so, and on another entirely asexual. Does he think it is continually hybriding itself? I scratch away at the fungus enveloping the letters, but this just blurs them. I must read along with the growth of the fungi, taking account of the fur-covered paragraphs and the sentences distorted with mould. Another page is addressed to me. I'm sure of it. He's preparing me. I'm getting tired again. I'm entering the same sleep I had before, but I find I can keep reading. If anything, it is becoming clearer. Richard is describing the same symptoms I'm experiencing, but it's not just Richard. I mean, it must be, but it's as if he's writing from the perspective of the whole rainforest. I have a very strong impression that he is there next to me, once again helping me understand the significance of what he's written. Green tendrils mix with the black ink, and shades of purple webs cover each page. I realise that the mycelium turn clockwise as they grow, turning the Y's to G's and the R's to O's. My fingers delicately turn the pages in ways that surprise me. Their tips round down the corners and weave themselves among the living words. I understand that the veil is beyond taxonomy. I try to see where this is written, but I can't find the page. I read on. Now the script is different. On this page the letters are capitalised, the ink thicker, the growth older. I no longer try to simply understand it. There isn't enough time. Now I must simply believe it. Michael will be here soon. Michael has hardened against us. That's the only way I can say it. Michael brought us here. He knew what would happen. His footsteps are felt all around. I take out my own green notebook. I smear each page against the veil. The ink smudges instantly. I place it under Richard's body. It won't fool Michael, but it might delay him. I take Richard's book and walk further into the forest.
Yeah, so I was talking with the guys before, and I really love Ed's winning story so much that I decided I did actually want to introduce it. I'll quickly read Ed's biography, and then I'll talk very quickly about the story. So Ed Cottrell's writing has appeared in Neon magazine, Brittle Star, and the Mechanics Institute Review Online. He was shortlisted for the London Short Story Prize in 2017, and is an alumni of Writers' Centre Norwich of Norwich's Inspires programme. One of the things that I really liked about Notes on Baden's Veil was the sense that of a kinship and a rewriting or restructuring with relationships with non-human or with things outside of what we might think of ourselves as unitary human beings, and that happens in the story through writing. Writing is deformed with the interaction with the mushrooms. I think this sense is never more present than in Ed's story, the winning story. It's so wonderfully sort of strange and weird and kind of repulsive at the same time as very intimate and caring and beautiful. And those two things together are really amazing. And I hope you think so. So if you put your hands together for Ed, thanks.
Hello. I just want to say thank you for that really lovely introduction, and thanks to Desperate Literature for organising this amazing prize, which I'm really humbled to be a part of at all, actually. If you find yourselves in Madrid, definitely seek out Desperate Literature. It's absolutely just probably the coolest bookshop up there with the bookshop behind me. But I just had such a great time visiting, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's been involved in it, so thank you. I'll read my story, Frailings, and I hope you enjoy it. By the water I freed them. They flew up into the willows, the wilder ones watching, buoyed on the gently moving surface. I walked along the bank. They clustered at the close hems of mud, picked over scatterings of rice. They pinched the grains in their mandibles, threshed their antennae, glowed. All as one, they lifted their wings to reveal their backs, their bodies, each like a veiled coin. I had the speechlessness which comes post-release, with nothing to offer them. I watched them swim and ripple the water, measured their confidence by the increasing distances they allowed between us. My instinct was to follow them, wade into the cold water. Weren't these creatures mine? It was me that had summoned them. Each burrow was dug within my body, each spectre adapted to my brow. They were my inhabitants, the bugs of my rotted trunk. When I started to disintegrate, they were the buds of life sprouting from me. Now they belong to nobody. Out on the water, they are freed. I watch them toying with a plastic bottle, swimming in the reflected sky. They shine out of the rippled clouds, wrestling with a bottle. They darkle as that flotation device rolls under them, spins them back. I could provide a taxonomy of their forms, heartworm, the ribbons tying up my circulation, the death watch burrowed in my vertebrae. But I will not name or question them this way. To ask questions is to acknowledge their specific vacancy. To answer questions is dangerous. To store them unasked, more dangerous still. I only say to myself, you missed your chance, years ago. You have too many words at your disposal now. I have become used to the feeling of being a walking carapace. What is left behind is the knot from which they went flying. What is left behind is only the burrows from which they flew into the water, swimming. I am that cunningly supported structure that is left, the rest hollowed out to form abandoned passages, the spaces where their antennae brushed against me. Once they hatched, it was only a matter of time until the advent of their wings, curious tiles which opened on their backs, raised up through a matter of instinct, only to discover whatever an arthropod is able to record. From that point, our contact was less immediate. We diverged. Still, their voices could charm me. The singing of water, the tinkling of unlikely electronics. They transfixed me, their spectator, watching their blooms of growth, how each chitinous exoskeleton was scaled to encase them. I watch videos online to recreate that moment. I study the way the abdomen of each creature is poised before takeoff, and then how unlikely they are. It's like watching a car convince itself to fly. But I cannot watch too long. The narrator's voice describing these creatures as parasite is clouding the truth. To label them X or Y is to occlude a most basic instinct. How shy they were in departing. Those naked twigs installed in me, heads poking from their homes. They emerged with that same trepidation, inching out. Only once they were gone, I realized they would never return. I thought that. They've left me, standing at the water's edge. So I am forever at the water's edge. Small birds go flaming in the sky. The fissures of their beaks shine. Each predator trills with the stolen voice of prey. Post-release, there came the predictable decimation. Hardly had they tested their wings before they lost the game. They were picked out and eaten, replaced by the empty spaces. I follow their gaps. The space they leave is empty and bright, reflecting the light of departure. I hear their silence, the cleared spaces of their voices. The birds swoop, the flock fills itself, calling to each other, spotting survivors. What does it mean to see this hunt, to watch them feast beyond the point of fullness? And yet many are left. Great numbers that the birds are incapable of catching, protected perhaps by an acrid sweat, a smell, the bright colours with which they are studded. From time to time, I wish to contact these old inhabitants of mine, and, with what hope? Some communication, a touch, before again they will alight. I think at night of them, perceive them from a distance as they incandesce. I think I could capture them, return them to their roots, could speak their names to send them mad. But no. I make this pact with myself. It is enough to consider their phosphorescence, the impossible light that marks their breath. But so much for acceptance. Lately, I've been turning against these lines. I've shifted against my agreements, scratched them out with a pencil stub. I've met my inner co-conspirator in the unwatched cottage of my skull. We are aligned. And why not? Have I even called home these errant twigs of mine? Have I said, plain enough, my little chippings, it is time to return, come home? Have I tried to tempt them back from where they live, amongst floating rubbish, sleeping on the underside of leaves? My skeleton is briefly brightened like this. Each bone flexes like bamboo. I feel at home inside my twisting body, the currents which turn through my hollow stems. But I am spun so easily back to the sensation of being a heap of rotting wood. I return to the other conclusion I have so often reached. They will not come home for love, begging, money. No, I could hang cracked splints around my body, make tents of dark cloth to entice them. They will not come home. They are freed, printing air with their wings. The best I could hope for is they might appear, land on my skin, and in the exoskeleton I could perceive some answer. If they will not come back, I would ask, what to start sowing? What season? What nourishment must I gather for the site? What preparations should I make if I want this project sped along? I go back to the water for this. Every now and then, on the surface of the simmering lake, a pimple blows up and ripples slowly out. I break an eclair into pieces, throw the crumbs as far as I can. Their hungry mouths cast patterns of rings. I lie beneath the willow, shaded except for a triangle of sky crinkled by leaves. It's hot. I fold a cardboard box into a pillow to slump against, to fall into almost sleep. On such a hot day, the surface of the world seems like a layer of skin. Not even that. A molten surface of fake leather. My dreaming on such a hot day is condensation on that leather surface. I'm lying on my keys. They keep me half awake. It is this which allows the insight into a dream state. Everything flees this heat. A beetle clambers into the mouth of an old glass bottle, meets the glass hoop with testing limbs, slips and dangles off it, then falls to the dry earth under the tree. Thud. Next thing, it crawls up the cord of my shoelace. It pauses in the shade, pinching the shoelace, and waits there, I think, to remember what it was doing, what it thought. The beetle turns again, falls, lands with a thud surprisingly weighty, the only sound in the stillness. It falls on its back, wriggling limbs in the air, takes a moment to turn over by splitting its back, using its wings. Now righted, it half tucks them away. It goes the other direction, crawls off like a piece of unsilvered mirror. The stripe on its back grows, the wings split. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And that is it for the evening, or at least for the formal reading part of the evening. Do stick around, have a glass of wine with us. The wonderful 11 stories are on sale, so you've got... you've heard 4 of them tonight. You've got another 7 to discover. It's only €10. So €10 for 11 stories. That's less than €1 per story. That's €10 for access to 11 different minds, 11 different universes. It's rare to find such a bargain in today's day and age. I'd like to thank, obviously, the Desperate Literature crew for coming up. So Terry, to Emily and Rob over there. And, of course, to Ed, to Jay, to Georgia, and to Gordon. Could you give it up for our readers tonight? Thank you very much. So, books available inside, €10, and I'm sure they'd all be delighted to sign them, should you wish. Thanks for coming.